This evening we have two local gentlemen with us, Larry Clinton and Joe Tate. Both of them reside on houseboats. They'll be talking about the history of the boats. They'll also be performing regarding the history of the boats. So, that being said, kindly welcome to Sausalito Yacht Club, Larry Clinton and Joe Tate.
Yay!
Hi, thank you very much. By way of presenting our credentials, I moved to Capas Marina in the winter of 1981-82, just in time for a storm that created 90-mile-an-hour wind gusts that closed the Golden Gate Bridge and torrential rains that created a lethal mudslide in the Sausalito Hills. So that was my introduction to floating home living. I call it my trial by water. But I'm just a newbie on the waterfront compared to Joe, who moved here in 1966 and became the leader of the house band at the ferry boat Charles Van Dam, the Redlegs, which you're going to hear a lot more about later. He was also here and instrumental on the front lines of the houseboat wars of the mid-70s, which you're going to hear more about later, and is featured in a film about the houseboat wars called Last Free Ride, which if you really press him after the performance, he might be willing to sell you a copy of that DVD. So most of the information in this presentation comes from this book, Houseboats of Sausalito. It was the brainchild of Phil Frank. Many of you may remember him. He was one of the founders of the Historical Society and a beloved Sausalito guy. Unfortunately, he passed away before he could finish it, so it was finished by his widow, Susan, and friends from the Sausalito Historical Society and other local historical societies nearby. Now, that cover shot shows a family rowing out to their ark in the Belvedere Lagoon. And check out those hats. I think those hats are what killed the parasol industry right there. Now, Joe's going to set the mood for us by playing a song and telling the story of a song that's become kind of the anthem of the floating homes.
Thank you, Larry. I'm Joe Tate, and in August of 1967, I was living over on the main dock at Gate 5, and Otis Redding come walking down the dock. Okay, so I'm in bed, no clothes. I put my clothes on and came out, and stood out there on the dock, and he walked all the way down to the end, and he sat there maybe half hour, 45 minutes. And then he left, and he didn't say anything to anybody. A little crowd of us gathered out there. We're all like, is that Otis Redding, And somebody says, oh yeah, that's him. And I knew it was him because I bought all his albums, and listened to it all the time. And so he left without saying anything, and I had no idea what he was doing out there. It looked like he might have had a pencil and a piece of paper, but I don't know. It just looked that way. And so a month later, Bill Graham calls me up, and he wants my band to open for Otis Redding at the Winter Show, at Winterland, at the Christmas show. Excuse me. And so I'm thrilled, I thought, wow, great, I'm going to open for Otis Redding and be on the same stage with him. So we got all ready for the show, and of course, that he was killed on December the 11th, 15 days before the show. So Bill Graham does a bunch of hurry up and running around, and he hired the Doors and Chuck Berry to do the show. And so we opened for them instead. And there's some stories of that too, but to complete this story, about a month and a half later, Dock of the Bay came out on the radio. I said, that's what he was doing out there. Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting when evening come, watching the ships roll in. Then I watch them roll away again. Oh, I'm sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll like nothing gonna come my way. Everything just remains the same. I can't do what 10 people tell me to do, so I guess I'll remain the same. Sitting here resting my bones, but this loneliness won't leave me alone. 10,000 miles I would roam just to make this dark my home. Oh, I'm just a darkness bay, watching the tide roll away. Sitting up and down the bay, wasting time, all my time, all my time. You guys listen now, come on, help me out.
So these early floating homes were called arks because they had flat bottoms, so they could float at high tide and sit on the mud at low tide. And they were generally kept in secluded bodies of water like the Belvedere Lagoon. In fact, a community sprung up there called Arktown. And because originally they were owned by fishermen and boat builders, but the Victorians of San Francisco started buying them up in the 1880s as weekend residences or summer retreats. And so they would spend their time out there in these little communities. And an English newswoman wrote about what Arktown was like in 1899. She said, "There is an indescribable charm about the life. One has the pleasures of boating combined with the comforts of home. Sea baths are at everyone's threshold. Fish are caught and cooked while you wait. The monotony of the scenery is varied by the swinging of the ark as it is turns with the tide. There are neighbors, 30 or 40 families of them, within easy reaching distance if one can pull a stroke, for there is always a following of rowboats lazily resting upon the water in the wake of each ark. The butcher, the baker, and others who supply the needs of daily life, each has his little boat, which he sends around every morning for his customary order. And the joint for dinner," I think she meant a leg of lamb, "and the ice cream for dessert are delivered as promptly to the ark dwellers as they are to those who are still in the city." One of the annual big events at Arktown was a night in Venice, which featured concerts, fireworks, a torchlight procession of boats, open houses on the arks, prizes for best decorations. It was put on by groups that call themselves Descendants of Noah or veteran Venetians of the West. And one of those people, a woman named Lillian Saltonstall, recalled one of those soirees from 1905. "I remember particularly well one night in Venice. Belles and beaux were enjoying the scene and making love on the side. Finally, the moon began to wane, the music died away, and the lights went out. The night was over, and all the owners went back to their own houseboats. We felt relaxed and happy. It had been an evening filled with gay social contacts." That was a simpler time then. "Delicate dishes and easy kisses." And here's a song that may have come out of those days.
In fact, I think they may have been listening to this song. I got the blues with the baby down San Francisco Bay. Ocean liner, going so far away. Didn't mean to treat her so bad. She's the best girl I ever had. Going to cry. Lay down and die. Well, I ain't got a nickel. I ain't got a lousy dime. If she don't come back, I think
fire of 1906, a lot of San Franciscans lost their homes, and those who had arcs, many of them moved on them full time. And in order to make them easier to access, they brought them closer to shore, put them up on pilings, or built piers out to them. And that was really the beginning of waterfront living in the Bay Area. Most of them were kept in sheltered areas like the Belvedere Lagoon, and the lagoon was protected by this walkway with a drawbridge. So the boats were brought in for the winter, and then every spring the drawbridge would open and the boats and arcs could be brought out into the open bay. And this ritual, which you see this picture of here, is the genesis of opening day on the bay that we still celebrate every spring today. But once the drawbridge was closed in, they could no longer shelter in the lagoon, so the arcs were dispersed around to Sausalito, Tiburon, Larkspur. Many of them were put up on pilings, like Arc Row that you see right here along Bridgeway, and our cozy residences today. And this is an early photo of the floating homes community, or a houseboat community at Gate 6. And you can see, if you look down to the lower left, it's only halfway in the picture, but that's one of the arcs as part of this kind of hodgepodge of floating homes there. But what changed Sausalito forever was Marin ship, which sprung up here during World War II. This is Marin ship in all its glory. It operated 24/7, lit up the night sky. 20,000 people worked there. And they created tankers and Liberty ships for World War II. But once the war was over, Marin ship closed down, and the Bechtel company pretty much abandoned the property and all the excess material that was lying around there. So the Army Corps of Engineers decided they needed about 40 or 50 acres. The rest of it was put up for auction by sealed bids. And some of the original buildings were repurposed. This was the mold loft and yard office, and became known later as the Industrial Center building. It was supposed to be renting office space. But an artist, an abstract expressionist named Walter Kuhlman moved in there, and that began to attract artists to the ICB. So today, even today, ICB is primarily an artist workspace. And Walter Kuhlman lived and worked there well into his 90s before he passed away a few years ago. At the same time as this art scene was developing in the ICB, there was this similar art scene developing aboard the lumber schooner Lassen, which is beached down near where Galilee Harbor is today. That couple are Loyola and Ed Fortain. She was a jewelry maker, sold some of her work to Gumps, and he's shown there painting her portrait in front of the wheelhouse of that beached schooner that they lived on. They lived in there and had their studio up in the wheelhouse there, and they had other spaces on the boat that other artists rented or came to visit for classes. So this added to the whole concept of Sausalito as an art center. Among the people who visited the Lassen were Jean Varda, who went on to become well known in Sausalito as a flamboyant, very creative artist. And also the sometimes sailor, sometimes actor, sometimes writer, Sterling Hayden visited the Lassen also. But the man who really led to the development of the waterfront as we know it today was Donlin Arquez. Arquez had grown up on the property, and when lots became available for purchase, he started buying them up. And he also realized that Bechtel and the Army Corps had abandoned lots of surplus material, lifeboats, barges, landing craft, and all of that could be repurposed. Because at the time, a lot of veterans were coming back to go to school on the GI Bill, and they were looking for inexpensive housing. A lot of those veterans happen to be interested in enrolling in the art academies all around the Bay Area and living in Sausalito in these makeshift homes where they could take over a lifeboat hull, build a superstructure on it, and live virtually rent-free. So again, that added more weight to the reputation of Sausalito as an art colony. Also, some of the other buildings of Marine Ship were turned into spaces for maritime trades and other waterfront activities, which we're still trying to preserve today. Waldo Point was a stop on the Northwestern Pacific Rail Line, which started in 1875. But even Phil Frank described it as a mythical settlement of writers, artists, musicians, boat builders, and dreamers that remains so to this day. And I can vouch for that firsthand. The Charles Van Dam, the Charles Van Dam was beached at Waldo Point by Donald Arquez and immediately became a nightclub which featured a band called the Red Legs, which was led by Joe Tate, and this is one of the Red Legs songs from that era.
Oh, really?
All right. Yeah, the Red Legs, you know, and there was this one song that was very popular in Sausalito. It was probably the song that was most requested ever that we played. And it's called Bonnie Lee. And Bonnie Lee was a woman that lived with Jean Lee. And they had two little houseboats that were anchored out, and they were drunks and drug addicts. Yeah, and they carried on all the time, and they would take turns shooting at each other from the respective boats. You know, they had guns, and so I thought, wow, this would be a great subject for a song. And so I wrote this song about them, but I changed the facts around so they wouldn't realize it was about them. Okay, so this is how it goes. To his chest. Surprise! When he reached the trigger, the bullet scratched him on the head. Yeah, it hurt. Well, he fell back. He was dumbfounded. Of a terrible bullet was place shot, and he fell in deep water and exclaimed, "I cannot swim." Beneath their phone. Yeah, he's gone. Oh, he's gone, 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 gone. You know the young lady, she cried her eyes out, and she cried. Oh, you know she wailed, and she wailed all that moment. You know, in her face down in her hands, and her tears fell like raindrops to the river that claimed her man. Oh, Bonnie lives on the water. She's home tonight on the California shore. And from the deep and murky water comes a voice, the man she lost. My Bonnie Lee, would you come down here with me? Come on now, Bonnie, my Bonnie Lee. Won't you come on, come on, come on, baby, come on. Come on now, Bonnie, my Bonnie Lee. I love you so, Bonnie Lee.
After it was a dance hall, Charles Van Dam was a host to a restaurant that was both famous and infamous at the same time, Juanita's Galley. Some of you may remember that. After that, it kind of became a community center. But then in the early 80s, it was declared uninhabitable and was bulldozed. That was shortly after I moved to the community, and I happened to be walking by while that was going on. And I wasn't quite clear on what was happening, but I was aware that we were losing a connection to our past. Fortunately, some of the artifacts, like the smokestack and the paddle wheel, were saved by some of the local residents. They're being stored now, and there's an effort to preserve them so that they can be permanently displayed in the new park that's at the corner of Gate 6 and Bridgeway. If you're interested in that program, you can go to www.charlesvandamferry.org and find out about where things stand and how you might be able to help them. Another ferry of note in the floating homes community is the Vallejo. This is another one that Don Arquez saved from the scrap heap and beached in the on the waterfront. And in the 50s, it was bought by Jean Varda. Varda is probably Sausalito's most famous artist, at least amongst locals. Very colorful guy. In fact, his life was as much a piece of art as any art that he created. And after he bought it, he was joined on board by Alan Watts, the Zen philosopher. Now, that kind of sounds like the odd couple on paper, but they got along famously, and they loved to party. And so the Vallejo became the epicenter of the bohemian culture on the Sausalito waterfront and really established that reputation for the Sausalito waterfront. Some of the early houseboats were built on this surplus army materiel. This is the Spanish helmet, and it's built on a lifeboat hull. You can kind of see just off to the left there the outlines of the hull. If this image looks familiar, you may have seen a painting that's made from the same angle that's hanging in the hallway of City Hall. This was a balloon barge. During World War II, these barges were anchored outside the Golden Gate and around all the military installations in the bay. They had gas balloons tethered to them that became a kind of an airborne submarine. The idea was to deter low-flying bombers so that they would not hit their targets or turn back. And since there's no record of San Francisco being bombed during World War II, apparently they worked. Now this one was repurposed and built into a home by a legendary waterfront artist named Chris Roberts. And it was purchased by Shel Silverstein, poet, children's author, songwriter, Renaissance man. He and a partner, as a photographer named Larry Moyer, were sent out here by Playboy magazine in the early 60s to do a profile of San Francisco. Well, of course, one of the first places they went to was the Haight-Ashbury, and they ran into a rock star there named Dino Valenti. Dino steered them towards San Francisco and said, "You're going to love this, toward Sausalito and the houseboat scene." So they showed up here and decided to stay. Shell bought this boat, named it the Evil Eye, and lived on it for many years before he finally decamped to Key West. But he left the boat to Larry Moyer in a life estate, and Larry lived on it for decades until he passed away in his early 90s. Larry was a great waterfront character. He had a booming Brooklyn accent, big bushy beard with a gnarly old pipe sticking out of it. He liked to wear a admiral's blazer with epaulets and grass all over it, and he was a beloved figure on the waterfront. Now this was another Chris Roberts creation here. If you can see the tall building there, just slightly to the right of the center in the photograph, that's the Madonna. It was built on an old pile driver. And some of Chris's structures were more really sculptures than residences. People came and went from the Madonna, but then one night it was lost in a fire. And Joe was an eyewitness to that event, and he can tell us about it.
Well, yeah. So we had this old sunken dredge. We called it Dredge Town. We had about 5 barges that were sunk right next to the Sausalito Cruising Club, just offshore from there. And of course, it was a public nuisance, you know. I promised the city that I was going to remove the whole thing, but all I did was scrap it out and build my boat there and sail away, and sold it to somebody else. But anyway, I would sleep there one night and look out the window. At some point, well, I believe my wife Pam told me, it looks like the tower is burning. That's what we all called it, the tower. So I got up, look out there, and there I can see clearly the outline of the Madonna, and it's all in flames. And so I went down there, and Saul was there with his camera. He shot a bunch of movie film of it and stuff. And we asked around, how did this happen? It turns out there was some guy staying in there that thought he was Jesus Christ. And so he was going through his little crucifixion procedure in which he was heating up nails on a barbecue. He had a little hibachi in there. And he was trying to push them through his hands, see, when they were red hot. And apparently it hurt so much he knocked over the hibachi and the whole place caught on fire.
So this is the way waterfront legends are born. This was, there's another structure in this photo. The next tallest one to the left there is called the Owl. That's another Chris Roberts masterpiece. And the Owl still is afloat on South 40 Dock today. A stylized version of this has kind of become the logo of the Floating Homes Association. So this is the waterfront in the 60s. It's kind of impromptu, little bit discombobulated. It consisted of floating docks, jumbled electrical wiring, very little plumbing. And so by the mid-70s, the county had decided to clean it up and bring it up to code. Also by that time, the Bay Conservation and Development Commission had been created to regulate development on the bay. So the BCDC permitted the construction of 11 designated floating home docks in 5 different marinas. And people were invited to bring their boats up to code and move on to those docks where they would be hooked up to all the shoreside utilities, gas, electric, and plumbing most of all. Well, some people jumped at the opportunity, but other people resisted what they saw as a gentrification of their lifestyle. And that resistance led to the infamous houseboat wars of the mid-70s. This is a scene from one of the earliest skirmishes in that war. This little boat got caught in a push-pull between sheriff's deputies and hippies because they had tried to block the bringing in of a pile driver that was brought in to complete the construction of Liberty Dock. Joe was on the scene for that and can tell us more about exactly how it went down.
Okay. Well, you know, we had a little band there. It was called it didn't have a name yet, but we were practicing on the Potato Barge, Oakland, which is at Gate 6. And the place got bought out from under us, and we got kicked out. So we moved out to the dry docks. These really filthy things that used to be out in the middle of Richardson Bay here. Do any of you ever remember seeing the dry docks here in Sausalito? Anybody that old? Yeah, okay. All right. So we lived at the dry docks, and it was a filthy place to live, and it was also very wet. So what happened was our blue jeans, the seams kept rotting out of them. And so what we did to cure that problem was we painted the seams with the only color we had, which was red. So we're running around with these blue jeans with red stripes on them, right? And we weren't called the Red Legs yet, but what happened was the police came out, you know, and they were going to throw us off of there, right? But of course, all my friends, they had guns, you know, and they got their guns out and they started shooting their guns up in the air. And the cops just left. And so it came to a discussion, and somebody was saying, you know, those guys out on the dry docks, they're just a bunch of rednecks. And the local whip, John Stevens, corrected them and says, those are not rednecks, those are red legs. All right, but then one morning we're out there, yeah, and the name stuck. That's how we became the Red Legs. So we're out there one morning and we're looking up towards Gate 5, and we can see a Boston whaler out there. And people are in it that have gold helmets on. We put the binoculars on, it's sheriffs. And they're towing a houseboat away. A houseboat that I do, something called, and it's not the one that's downtown here, the Taj Mahal, which was a little houseboat. It was built on a lifeboat, but it was all made up like a little ashram and stuff. It had those kind of windows, you know, that go like that and stuff. And the guy was a full-on Hare Krishna devotee, Russell was. And they towed his houseboat up to the heliport where they were going to destroy it. They had a tow truck right there, and they were going to pull it out of the water. Well, we went up there to rescue him. There wasn't much we could do. I gave Russell a knife. I said, go up and cut that tow rope. And so he was up to do that. And that's when you see the picture in the Chronicle where the cops are pointing a gun at him, and he backed off. And so we left, went back to Gate 5. In the meantime, we got our lawyer on the case. We had been giving benefits at the Charles Van Dam to raise money for the Houseboat Defense Fund. And we luckily got a really good lawyer, a guy named Carl Shapiro. And so he went to court to do something about it while this whole skirmish is going on. So we get back down to Gate 5, and they've put officers on a boat called the Camel. It's anchored out there, and they're going to tow that one away. But we went in and just rallied everybody in the houseboats, and they all came out in their skiffs. Like we had like 50 or 60 skiffs out there, and they completely surrounded it. And the cops are on the houseboat. They were surrounded, and the tugboat pilot says, I'm quitting, I'm not doing this. And so he left and left the officers sitting there on that houseboat. And we were just parading around, we're giving the royal bird and everything, you know. And so pretty soon they called the Coast Guard, and the Coast Guard came. The Coast Guard came and rescued the officers. And so that was the end of that. But in the meantime, Carl Shapiro had gone to court and got an injunction to prevent them from wrecking Russell's houseboat, which they had towed up to the heliport. And they released it. We went up to the heliport and brought the boat back, and that was one for us. Yeah, we won one battle against the cops. That wasn't the only one. We won another one too. And I think this may be the one here. And I don't want to go into that, but that was the one time we really looked good. So we're going to do a song about the war?
Not yet.
Okay.
So the county did make a few arrests and did confiscate a few boats. But when photos like this made the local media and the Marin Humane Commission determined that what they were doing was inhumane to the people living on board, the county backed down. And so the houseboat wars quieted down for a while, but they continued to flare up for many, many times since. And now, Joe's going to sing us a song that might have inspired some of those protests.
You think? All right. This is called Troubled Times. One more time, see it coming. Troubled time, here again. Got no money, pay my bills with. Oh, it sure does look like troubled time again. The landlord says he's down in hard times. Only makes 10 grand a month. Says he's got to wreck this tired old building. Build it up and raise the rent 4 times again. Well, I went to City Hall. It didn't take no time at all, 'cause they threw me right out on my ear. Oh, told them that I must find a reason that is just why you got to wreck my happy home. And it wasn't too long before the cops were standing at their door. Say, come along, little peaceful. Yeah, we went down to that jail. They didn't want no bail. Say, get on home, don't you cause no trouble. I don't know who's to blame. Things are messed up, just the same. Guess I'm going, jump my bail. Oh, it sure does look like trouble time again. Oh, but it do. And it sure does look like trouble time again. Trouble time again. That's you, Larry.
All right. So once the docks were completed, a different kind of floating home started to emerge. They were non-navigable, and they actually have a legal definition of floating home. And the community definitely became more middle class, but hardly traditional. This is a home on South 40 that the main floor there is actually a piece of rolling stock from the Northwestern Pacific Railroad. It was cut in half lengthwise and then cut in half sidewise, and the 4 quadrants form the main floor of this home. And the couple that owns it, he's a past president of the Floating Homes Association. They've done a lot of traveling, particularly to the Far East, and that home is just decorated to the gills with art and artifacts from all over their travels. It's really one of the most photographed homes in our community. It's called a train wreck. Now, there are other floating homes outside of our community in Sausalito, and this is probably the most famous one, the Taj Mahal, which is right near here at the Sausalito Yacht Harbor. And there are other enclaves that are what we call mixed-use marinas. Galilee Harbor is one, Sausalito Yacht Marina, which is in the old Arquez shipyard area. These are combinations of liveaboards, working sailboats, maybe some floating homes. So they're mixed use, and they don't fall under our legal definition of floating homes. Today, the floating homes community that Joe and I live in has really become world famous. We often see busloads of German and French tourists uh, unloading on our docks, and people come strolling down the dock, sometimes asking to use our bathrooms. And of course, our floating homes tour, which we haven't held in a couple of years now, typically draws about 1,000 people on a Saturday afternoon. So we're definitely a part of the Sausalito mystique these days. Joe is going to take us out with one final song for your enjoyment.
Okay. This song is entitled Sausalito. All the places I have been, feel at home in Sausalito, and across the Golden Gate Bridge, my heart is there in San Francisco. Oh, how I love all the wooden ships sailing San Francisco Bay, along the docks of Sausalito. I met my love and sailed away. Oh, so that I married a boat and I sailed her under the rainbow, leaving all of my worries behind in Sausalito. I sailed down south to Mexico way, the city of Acapulco, and across the ocean wide to a lake called the Hilo. And there I made a whole lot of friends, all the Connie and Mahini. But the one thing on my mind is being back home with my baby. I was as lonesome as I could be so long ago. Now I live at home with my baby in Sausalito. Thank you all so much. I got some copies of Last Cheap Ride here if anybody wants to take some home. I also have some CDs. You got any merch?
No, but I wanted to mention that Joe does a regular Monday night blues jam at the Cruising Club. This is a poster for next Mondays.
Yeah.
So you can hear him and other great local musicians jamming there every Monday night. So thank you very much for inviting us today, and we'll like to open it up for any questions.
Your photo from the book of the waterfront with the shipbuilding goes on with the lights. Can you put that back up and just give me some context on where that was?
Yeah, it's where the Bay Model is today.
So all of that stuff is right there.
The Bay Model was the warehouse of Marin ship. And what happened was they needed to fill in some marshy area to create this. They did this all in 6 weeks. They got an emergency order to build. This was the last shipyard built, at least on the West Coast, and I think in the whole country during World War II. So there was a hill. If you walked behind the Bay Model and you see a rather steep drop off from Bridgeway, that's the remains of a hill that was called Pine Hill. And they, in those days, there weren't the kinds of restrictions that there were today. They just seized all these homes on Pine Hill, tore them loose, relocated them, blew the hill up, and made that the landfill to fill in for Marin ship. That all happened, as I say, in 6 weeks. So Marin ship opened in 1942, and it closed in 1946. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you again, and see you here at the show.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, and thank you, everybody, for coming. And just one final point that I forgot to mention earlier. This is a very busy time on San Francisco Bay. The Big Boat Series is starting tomorrow. And we have from this club 3 boats. Chuck, Gary, and Neil's boats are competing. I believe the total fleet is 80 some odd boats. So anyway, big racing time off the city front, off Alcatraz, and periodically they pass by here. So keep an eye and ear open for the world-class sailors. Great events, great photography, lots of colors with the spinners, etc. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being members. Thank you for what you do. And we'll see you in a week.
Yeah.
Good night.